Our first session tonight will be Kenneth Alford and Craig Manscill, so I hope you're in the right places. So Kenneth L. Alford is a professor of church history and doctrine at Brigham Young University. After serving almost 30 years on active duty in the United States Army, he retired as a colonel in 2008. While on active military duty, Ken served in numerous assignments, including the Pentagon, 8 years teaching computer science at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and 4 years as department chair and professor teaching strategic leadership at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He has published and presented on a wide variety of topics during his career. His current research focuses on the Hyrum Smith papers, as well as Latter-day Saint military service during times of conflict. Ken and his wife, Sherry Lee, have 4 children and 13, soon to be 14, grandchildren. Dr. Craig K. Manscill has been a religious educator for over 35 years in seminaries and institutes and at Brigham Young University Provo, where he is an associate professor of church history and doctrine. He was reared in far west Utah. He earned his undergraduate degree from Weber State College and his graduate degrees at Brigham Young University. He is the author of numerous articles and several books. Currently, he and Ken Alford are working on the papers of Hyrum Smith. Reading and travel are his passions. Brother Manscill enjoys being outdoors, pursuing his hobbies of landscaping, gardening, and ultra-distance running. This year will be his 22nd running of the St. George Marathon. He is married to Jana Lee Hansey of Ogden, Utah, and they are parents to 8 children and 15 grandchildren. I'd like to turn over the time to Ken.
You can clap now. Yeah. All right, welcome out. Can everyone hear from the back there? Sounds good. Okay, great. Thank you for coming to our presentation. Dr. Alford is sitting right here. Raise your hand, Ken, so you can see him. He'll be working with you on the second part of the presentation. So it's nice to see our students here. Brother Alford and I gave them an incentive to come, so thanks for showing up, students. You're awesome. You know, okay. All right, let's see if I can make sure I get the clicks going here. So many of you have heard about the Joseph Smith Papers Project. This has been a project that's been ongoing by the Church Historical Department in Salt Lake City. The significance and the contribution of these papers will go for years and years to come to bring and highlight Joseph Smith's great works, and the volumes are continuing to come out. However, over the years, the place of Hyrum Smith in the events of the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ has not necessarily had the same play that Joseph Smith has. So, yeah, we've been hearing. So, in a sense, drum roll, please. Yes, Brother Alford and I are working on the Hyrum Smith project. It's the Hyrum Smith Papers. How many descendants do we have of Hyrum Smith in here? Anyone in tonight? There we go. We knew we would draw at least a few in, so welcome. All right, don't be too hard on us tonight, okay? At any rate, we will take questions towards the end. Brother Alford and I are working with over 600 documents at this time. Letters, journals, diaries, account books, legal documents about land, records, and etc. on the Hyrum Smith Papers. Our presentation this evening will be give you a sort of a glimpse into the Hyrum Smith Papers as we compare the letters coming out of Liberty Jail of Joseph Smith and Hyrum Smith. Joseph and Hyrum were the best of friends. They were brothers. These two brothers were 2 of 8 brothers and 3 sisters born to Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith. The only thing that separated them as siblings was a sister in between named Sophronia. They are 5 years apart in their birth. Joseph, in the early days, Joseph, if you recall, in Lebanon, New Hampshire, the leg operation, when the typhoid fever went through the valley there, all the Smith children came down with it. Joseph's contractions, you remember, resulted in his leg operation. You remember there was a very enduring relationship that was struck up between these two brothers. As an elder brother, Joseph was assigned to change the bandages and dress Joseph's his operation as it was healing and seeping. More importantly, as the pain was excruciating, he would hold Joseph's calf in his hands, and he would compress it together to relieve the pain. This is the kind of thing that brought this eternal bond of friendship between all the way from the youth, all the way into Joseph Smith's life. Hyrum Smith was supportive of his younger brother's visions, the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. He was one of the 8 witnesses selected by Joseph the prophet for the Book of Mormon. Hyrum also was a charter member of the church on the day that it was organized, selected by his younger brother, the prophet. So these two brothers were knit together, as you know, from the beginning all the way into the end of the martyrdom. Now, the context of the incarceration of Joseph and Hyrum is set in the 1838 Mormon War. The war occurred in the Caldwell and Daviess County in the far west area of Missouri. Events such as Sidney Rigdon's inflammatory speeches called the Salt Sermon, and this is in June and July, July the 4th, and the Independence Day speech that was given by Sidney Rigdon. It was Sidney Rigdon that first termed gave us the term of exterminate, not the Mormons, but the Missourians. He used that in his speech. It was this kind of inflammatory language that got back to the Missourians that began to look and lead up to the Mormon War of 1838. Other events that occurred now was the election at Gallatin, in Gallatin, where there was a tussle that turned out. You have October 24th, the affidavit signed by those leaders of the church who had turned apostate in the far west period, such as Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Thomas B. Marsh, W.W. Phelps, to name a few, who added fuel and flame to the fire of this rising Mormon war. You have the extermination order, you have Hansville Massacre, and then on the 31st of October of 1838, you have the Governor Boggs has called out the militia, the state militia, and they've now, in a sense, surrounded or confronted the saints and their militia in the far west. That's what this C.C. Christensen painting depicts, is unfortunately our traitor, which we call Colonel George M. Hinkle, turned over 5 of the leaders of the church, including Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, into the hands of Governor Lucas. Now that with the leaders we're in the hands of the leaders, as you know, then Governor Alexander Donovan will save them from going to a firing squad, as you know that particular story. They were Hyrum wasn't in that first group that was betrayed by Hinkle. On November the 1st, Hyrum, along with a number of other early members of leaders of the church, were trying to escape the area into Iowa. Amos Lyman and Hyrum were captured and then added to the group of 5. These 5 then were paraded around in Independence, finally ended up in Richmond jail, which is really a home. In the month of November, there's a 13-day hearing that goes on under the circuit judge, 5th Circuit Judge for Missouri, named Austin A. King. Austin A. King conducted this hearing. It was a sham of a trial, if you remember. Every witness that was brought forward or names for the defendants, they either ran them off for the trial or they arrested them. By the time that was over in 2 weeks, they had 64 of the leaders of the church in the Richmond jail. All right, so it was in the Richmond jail, not the Liberty jail, that we learn of the famous incident where Joseph Smith in Majesty of Change. How many recall that great episode? Yeah, where Joseph Smith rebukes the guard and simply tells them either he or them will die this instant if they don't stop their inflammatory remarks about the pilfering of the saints. Austin King's confinement order, Judge King's confinement order, he had a decision to make at the end of the month of November. Either he had to incarcerate the 64 or release some of them, of which the majority of the 64 leaders of the church were released. He could send them to either Columbia, Gallatin, or Liberty. He singled out how many? 6 individuals based on the threat that they offered to reorganize the saints in Far West around the Quasar Far West militia and perhaps oppose the extermination order. So this is a picture of Austin here. The 6 individuals here can be divided into 2 groups. The first 3 are the first presidency of the church. Joseph and Sidney originally, you certainly knew, were in the first presidency. Hyrum is put in a year earlier in Far West as a result of Frederick G. Williams and his apostasy in the church at that particular time. So they wanted to, the highest quorum of the church were now, going to be incarcerated, going to Liberty Jail as a result of Austin now saying we need to move these 6 men. The others, Lyman White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McCrae. Lyman White was, had somewhat of a short fuse. He was living up in Davies County in the Adamon-Diamond area. He was in the militia, the 50th Regiment of the Missouri State Militia. He actually had called out 150 of the militia to defend the saints up in the Missouri area during this 1838 Missouri War. So Lyman White was an experienced soldier, knew what that meant, so that's one reason why he's singled out. Alexander McCrae was also in the Far West militia. He had also fought in the War of 1812, so he was an experienced soldier there as well. Caleb Baldwin, on the other hand, just didn't have any kind of military experience, and he pleaded with Austin King that he might be released. He made the case that I have 10 children, I'm 47 years of age, and my wife is destitute trying to take my family across. And so you've got these individuals, they all had reasons why that they were incarcerated. When they were brought to Liberty Jail, they were under the direction of John Hadley, who was the sheriff of Liberty County. He had 2 jailers working for him, one by the name of Ford and the other by the name of Tillery. While he was in these, as they were incarcerated, these 2 jailers come to see the 6 prisoners not as criminals, but as intellectual men who were often in deep thought and great discussion and respect for all those around them. These 2 jailers, Tillery was the one who provided the daily fare or the meal for the prisoners. They received 1 meal a day while they were in Liberty Jail, and it was given to them in the evening, and it was the scraps from the table of the meals of the jailers that day. So that's what they were. Journal accounts talk about they were just given a corn of cob with no corn on it, and etc. Now, Liberty Jail was built in 1833 at a cost of $600. It was a 2-story structure. How many have been to Liberty Jail? Raise your hand. So you're, a good deal of you been there. It's a 2-story structure. It's 14. The inside dimensions of the jail on these 2 stories is approximately 14 square feet. It was built out of rough hewn limestone. So just take a look at this limestone here. The floor is limestone. It was cold. We often think that it was nice, it was straw. You see Joseph in those kind of situations. The inside and outer wall was made of a wall of oak logs. There were 2 thick walls around it, 1 rock, 1 wood, and they were separated by a 12-inch space filled with loose rock. And so the walls were 4 feet wide, and that's what was, going to keep these prisoners in. Although they will have 2 escape attempts, of which we're going to talk about. Here's the outside of the jail. Yes, there were steps going up to this. This is the door. It's 5.5 feet tall, and it's 2.5 feet wide. Also notice the 2 slits. This is the slits for the bottom dungeon of the jail, and this is the window up above. That's the only light that would come in, natural light into the jail. And notice, there's no chimney. There is no way to heat the jail. They were allowed to have a fire on occasion. down in the lower dungeon, but the smoke, what is it? You want heat or you want smoke? And so they had to deal with that. They were incarcerated from December 1 till April 6th of 1839. That's a total of 127 days. And what months were they? The winter months. So this is a cold time of year, and if you've ever been in Missouri, you know that piercing humidity that comes along with the cold, right? And that's what they were faced. Often the artist's depictions don't really give justice to what happened. Joseph is clean shaven, his hair looks, and his clothes look clean. That wasn't the case. They had no means to shave. They had a honey bucket for their refuge. It was a difficult situation in any regard. Sidney Rigdon was having convulsions because of the cold as a result of his tar and feather earlier. He was having a particularly difficult time. This is some of from the letters coming out of Liberty Jail describing what it was. The grates and the squeaking iron doors constantly, dirty straw couches, the nauseous smell, the grimace of the guard day and night, weary joints and bones, and this hell was surrounded with demons. The local people in the town would come and treat them like caged animals and poke sticks in and yell out obscenities to them. Pen or tongue or angels could never describe this experience. They were allowed to have visitors in the jail, okay, and throughout the winter months, a number of people attended. Church leaders like Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, George A. Smith. The wives and the families would also visit them. Joseph Smith had Emma on more than one occasion come and visit. In this depiction is Joseph Smith III on the ladder. She brought him. He's about a 6-year-old lad at that time. It might surprise you that Emma and Hyrum's wife, Mary at this time, stayed the entire evening in the jail. On one occasion, 2 nights and 2 days they were allowed to stay with their husbands and to give them comfort. Here are the letters that Joseph writes out of Liberty Jail. There are 3 letters to Emma, and talking about Emma, giving her encouragement, counsel, and comfort. The third one is to Priscilla Huntington, a friend. Joseph his church responsibility as prophet, he's thanking her for her friendship and her interest. But 2 of the letters are to the church at large, and then the one's a business letter, number 6, to Isaac Garland, of which we'll purchase land later on for him in the Nauvoo area. We're most interested in the number 4, the 20 March 1839 letter that we're going to make the comparisons to. In the Hyrum Smith letters, we have 7 letters, personal letters of jail letters. Notice who's the main topic, who's he writing to? Mary Fielding Smith. And these letters Ken's going to go over Brother Alford, and they're heart-wrenching. Hannah Reynolds was like a nanny living in the home since the early Kirtland period with the Smiths. Now here's the March 20th letter. The March 20 and 21st letter was addressed or posted to Emma Smith over in Quincy, Illinois. And it was, you can see it here, it was addressed, an epistle from Liberty to, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. By then, section 115 had been given. This was now the name of the church, and so that's where you see Joseph is using that. Here's the first page of this letter that we're going to be examining today. It was written to the Church of the Latter-day Saints. That was the Kirtland name of the church before section 115. And it was specifically addressed to the bishop of the church, Bishop Partridge, over in Quincy. It had a cover letter, and this cover letter is most interesting. It's addressed to his affectionate wife. I've sent this epistle to the church, directed to you because I want you to have the first reading of it. There were some personal things in this, and it's from this letter now, is that we'll have sections 121, 122, and 123 of the Doctrine and Covenants. She's to keep the original and most importantly show it to her parents. Now, how long was this letter? How many pages? This is called the A, and then this is the B. There were how many? 29 pages. They didn't write this letter on one day. The main scribe was Alexander McCrae, and Baldwin also helped on it. McCrae, who was 31 years of age, had the best handwriting during the scribing on this letter. It was signed Joseph, Hyrum, Lyman White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McCrae. Who's missing? Where's Sidney? Why isn't he signing? So it caught up with him, the cold and his seizures, and in January he goes before the judge at a hearing and is released. That's quite a story in itself. He felt so threatened he couldn't leave the jail. Even though he'd been released, he stayed in the jail 10 more days because his enemies were lying outside against him. All right, so the question we're asking, what was the influence of Hyrum Smith on Joseph Smith's letters, particularly the March 20 and 21st letter of 29 pages, which the revelations come from the Doctrine and Covenants? I would like to make 3 suggestions before I turn it over to Brother Alford. 1, Hyrum was a member of the First Presidency and had the purview and right to give Joseph advice and counsel. He's a member of the First Presidency. He could do that. Sidney's not here at this time. Number 2, he's a trusted brother that has proven his judgment. And number 3, the most obvious, they're in close proximity day after day for 127 days, and they're sharing their thoughts. And with that in mind, I'll now turn the time over to Brother Alford.
Great, thanks, Craig. So what we want to look at is to take these letters. I can't be behind the podium, it doesn't work. What we want to do is to look at these. We're going to start first with one that's not actually a letter. It's a little diary that Hyrum keeps. It's a little pocket diary. It's just inside a shirt pocket. Interestingly, he calls it the daily record of Hyrum H. Smith. He gets the date wrong of his incarceration. By the time he writes this, his memory has faded enough that he thinks he's actually captured before he is. He's captured actually 3 days later after that, but he's trying to reconstruct this in 1839. Just kind of a small message on why you write stuff down at the time it happens. But what we want to do is, I'm going to show you on the left statements from Hyrum's letters, or in this case his diary, and then kind of equivalent statements that are taken out of that March 20 to 21st letter that becomes section 121, 122, and 123. The wording is not exactly the same, but the sentiments are the same. You can see Joseph and Hyrum are clearly talking, because as Craig mentioned, what have they got to do? All day long, 24 hours a day, they're with each other. So clearly they're talking about these things. When it comes time for Joseph to write that famous March 20th letter, they've been talking about these things for weeks and weeks and weeks. So we begin here. Hyrum says, I was with others committed to jail. You know, it says in section 122, if you're cast in the pit, you know, very similar. He says the same accusations that were made against them were made against the Son of God. Again, in section 122, it says the Son of God hath descended below them all. We have here a statement from Hyrum talking about what the mob's done to the families and what he's done, what they've done to them. They've confined them, made them destitute. This very long statement found in section 123, where Joseph tells the saints to seek redress, echoes those statements. All of these, by the way, are in the Sperry paper. You can get them full. You're welcome also, if you got a phone and you want to take pictures, you're welcome to take any of that. But what we found as we started reading these side by side with sections 121, 122, and 123 is it's not just out of Joseph's head that we get those sections. And it makes good sense that his counselor in the First Presidency is going to counsel with him on this important letter that eventually becomes canonized. The first letter that Craig showed you is to Hannah Grinnell's. And we don't have a great deal of information about her. She's an older woman. She's born, it looks about, as best we can tell in the records, about 1783. She's in her 50s. We think she's staying in the Smith household. She's found in actually 2 of the federal censuses, the 1840 census in Hancock County and the 1850 census out in Utah. And the age is right, and her name is spelled various ways. As best we can tell from the patriarchal book from Nauvoo from 4 July 1845, she's a widow, which would make sense for her staying with the Smiths. She's got children, because in her patriarchal blessing she's promised that she'll have her companion and her children back in the resurrection, implying that her husband is dead and she has more than one child. Her oldest child, it looks like, is almost exactly the same age as Lavina, which is Hyrum and Jerusha's oldest child. And so living in the household, Lavina's got a playmate and somebody to grow up with. We think Hannah's there and supportive. Interesting, that Hyrum writes his first personal letter to her and not to Mary. Out of this letter, just wanted to share one piece. This is right at the end of the letter. He addresses this paragraph to his oldest, Lavina, and says, Lavina, my child, you must be a good girl. Be kind to your mother and your little brothers and sisters. Be steady and read your book. You may have my small book of Mormon. You must read it through and pray for your father that the Lord may help him come home. And then he addresses the other children in the home. Little John, little Hyrum, little Jerusha, little Sarah. You must be good children till father comes home. He will come home as soon as he can. There's no items from that letter that tie to sections 121, 122, and 123, but every letter prior to Joseph's March 20th letter to Mary has pieces that tie. This is what the March 16th letter that goes to Mary looks like, and it tells a great story that's not often told in the church. There are actually a couple of attempts to break out of Liberty Jail. The first attempt happens earlier in the year. This attempt has happened just before he writes the letter. What happens is it says here, some friends, there's no glass in the windows, and so some friends slip an auger in. Okay, I'll show you a picture of an auger on the next slide. But they slip an auger in through the bars. They also slip in an iron bar. So with the iron bar, they're chipping at the limestone, and with the auger, they're boring through the wood. And they get all the way ready to escape. He says, all we've got is just one of the big rocks we've got to move. But what happens is because the logs are so hard, as they turn the auger, it breaks the handles. And Hyrum says, I have to take my penknife and keep digging out a new handle, and it took us a lot longer than we thought. And so he tells Mary, it took us so long that by the time we got ready to escape in the evening, the jailer shows up. So just as we're ready to make a mad dash through the hole we're about to make, the jailer shows up. And I love this. He says, we're discovered, and there's no hard part on the part of the sheriff. And the sheriff likes him, as Craig mentioned, and the jailer, they're okay. But the Baptists and the Presbyterians and the Methodists in the area, they freak out. And they send tens of people to be guards at the jail, and so they post themselves around so that they can't sneak out. And then the jail is repaired, and they don't break out. Okay? But that's a 19th century auger, so it gives you a feel for how important that handle is in turning that auger. But again, not a story that we tell very often. Here's from that 16th letter. Oh God, how long shall we suffer these things? Doesn't that sound exactly like section 121, verses 1 to 3? Oh God, where art thou? How long will thy hand be stayed? I mean, you can see that they've been talking about these things. This is 4 days before the other letter that's written by Joseph. Oh God, wilt thou hear the prayer of thy servant? Section 121, let thine ear be inclined. Listen to us, please. May the Lord bless you and give you strength to endure these things, and if you endure them. I mean, we think there's just obvious overlaps here. You can see Hyrum's influence. This is from that letter. I just wanted to share little bits and pieces from it. Hyrum is asking, oh God, in the name of thy Son, preserve the life and health of my bosom companion, that she may be precious in thy sight, and all the little children, and all that's pertaining to my family, and hasten the time when ye shall meet each other's embrace. What Hyrum doesn't know is that Mary Fielding Smith is sick to the point of almost dying. All of the other wives of the other 5 prisoners come and visit during December, during January, and some of them in February. This is before they leave for Quincy. Mary never comes during that time until later, and then she brings little Joseph F. Smith, and he receives his name and blessing in the jail. But Hyrum wonders where she is. He doesn't hear from her. He doesn't know she's almost dead. She's being taken care of by her younger sister, Mercy, who is actually nursing Joseph F. Smith to keep him alive and taking care of Mary Fielding because she's so deathly ill. She physically can't travel to the jail. But Hyrum doesn't know that. This is the 19th letter, so 3 days later he writes to Mary again. And this is a shorter letter. And here he says, God said he has the power to deliver us from our enemies. You know, talking about triumphing over our foes, talking about the bonds of true friendship. Here, friendship in section 121 discussed again. And then Hyrum says this in that letter to Mary at the end. I've been informed that you're separated from the family because on different sides of the river, at that point the Mississippi. But my anxiety over you is such that I'm not sleeping. My faith and understanding is not sufficient to overcome these feelings of sorrow. He's really feeling horrible. Everybody else has seen their wives. Everybody else has heard from them. Again, he hasn't. Please tell me something so I can sleep. Excuse my poor writing. My nerves are somewhat affected, and my hands are this evening quite swollen, and my fingers are stiff and painful with rheumatism. What he doesn't tell her is he is very ill at this time. Right around the writing of the March 20th letter, Hyrum is very sick. But that's why this letter is short. This is the 20th letter. So on the day that Joseph pens the famous letter that becomes section 121 through 123, Hyrum pens this letter to Mary. And you know they're talking about this. As Joseph is in the process of dictating that famous letter, Hyrum is writing to Mary. If you have not forsaken me, again, God, where are you? Our enemies must be left without excuse. In the Revelation, let your anger be kindled against them. Our sufferings will call to mind the sufferings of the ancients. Remember the suffering saints, but we're not like Job, somebody from the ancient times. We must be patient in tribulation. You know, if you're called to pass through tribulation, be patient. In the March 20th letter, he also says this, and I think this is the most heartbreaking thing he says out of Liberty Jail. I thought if you could not write, you could send a friendly word. Tell somebody. We're getting letters from other people. Tell them that you're alive. I don't wish to harrow up your feelings if they're innocent, if there's a reason why you're not writing. But I thought it strange that you did not send one word to me when I thought you knew I was so anxious to hear from you. Oh, can't you feel for Hyrum? Listen to this next one. If you have no feelings for me as a husband, he's wondering if he's a jailbird. And he sees himself that way. If you have no feelings for me as a husband, you could send or cause to be sent some information concerning the little babe. That's Joseph F. Smith. Because this is a baby that's been born while he's been in jail. Mary's pregnant when he gets captured. Or those little children that lies near my heart. This letter is undated. In reading the contents, we think it's somewhere prior to the 20th March letter. But again, we're missing the first page, unfortunately. So we've had to give it a best shot. This letter has a great deal of information talking about letting the wicked be judged, as does section 121, about enduring well, being patient, triumphing over your enemies. Bonds and imprisonments are no disgrace. You're falsely accused. It talks about bondage again. Talking about learning by experience. Here, learning by experience. I mean, some of these phrases are so close. The scepter of the kingdom. The scepter is an unchanging scepter. I mean, it's just, they're clearly talking. If they're cast into the pit, it shall be well with them. If you're cast into the pit, again, the language is just too close to you. They're clearly communicated. This is one of the letters that's done after that 20th March letter that becomes sections 121 to 123. Hyrum quotes several poems to Mary in there. Not a lot of personal information. And then he writes again on April 5th. And in this one at the end, he basically offers up a prayer. He just asks the Lord, please bless my family. They're released the next day. They're taken out and kind of engineered and allowed to escape. There's a whole other story. There was some wonderful research that's been done on that. But those are Hyrum's personal letters. As we look at this is a transcript. This is a typed up transcript of Joseph's letter that he dictates, that all of the first presidency and the members that are in jail signed. This is how big that text is of those 29 pages that Craig showed you. What I want to show you is what happens in 1875-76 when parts are picked out to be canonized. These are the parts that are selected out of that letter. As you read section 121, when it says, how long can rolling waters remain impure? As well might man put forth his puny hand to stop the Missouri River up, upstream in its course. That famous verse. If it sounds like that verse is ripped out of the middle of something else and it doesn't connect with the verse before and the verse after, it's because it doesn't. It's ripped out of the middle. If we did this today, we'd have ellipsis all over section 121, but that wasn't the style in the 19th century. And so as we continue through this letter, we see that the end of section 121 butts up exactly against section 122. They touch, I find it amazing that he actually put that in a different section because it doesn't miss a beat. There's just a period between. Yet he pulls it out and makes it, Orson Pratt makes it 122. Then there's a gap, then 123. The other interesting thing is 122 and section 123 are contiguous. They're just, and just one body. They're not busted up at all. So how does this become a revelation? This is a letter written by Joseph, these 29 pages. He goes through and makes corrections on them after the scribe finishes, by the way. And they all had a chance to read it and sign it. Orson Pratt is asked by Brigham Young. This is in the last years of Brigham Young's life. Brigham dies in August of 1877. He asks Orson Pratt, sometime apparently in 1875, to go through and to look at this and decide if parts should be included into this scriptural canon. Orson Pratt does that, does, I think, a wonderful job excerpting this. This is the 1876 Doctrine and Covenants. This is the first time section 121 appears in the Doctrine and Covenants. You can see the extensive footnotes they had back then, right? So be grateful for your current 2013 scriptures. It's added to the 1876 Doctrine and Covenants as 122, 121, 122, 123. Then in October 1880, along with the Proliferate Prize, it is accepted by the church as canon. And so it joins formally the Doctrine and Covenants in the scriptural record. This is the way Liberty Jail pretty much looks when the church applies. Let me rephrase that. It's not bought initially by the church. It's bought by a guy by the name of Woods up in Bountiful. And then it comes into church possession after that. The church decides to rebuild 3 sides of it and puts it in the current visitor centers. We showed the picture. And that, if you've been to Liberty Jail, that was dedicated by David O. McKay in 1963. And it's been. We used to live in the Liberty Stake, and our stake center was the stake center really close to the jail. As you look at this, what our hope is with the Hyrum Smith Papers Project is to help bring Hyrum out of the shadows. Hyrum is always there. He's always there when we tell the story. But he's mostly silent. Hyrum isn't silent in the record. We want to bring him out to share what he has done. We want to put him, he is a tremendous supporter of his brother. He's willing to join him in death as he takes all of the Calvin's place as assistant president of the church. Hyrum, Joseph, and the other members there in Liberty Jail do the church a tremendous service as they write that March 20th and the 21st letter that becomes section 121, 122, 123. Which contains some of the most wonderful advice and counsel, I think, in the Doctrine and Covenants. And they produced it in that temple prison, as B.H. Roberts called it. Filthy, nasty place, and that amazing scripture comes out of that. And I guess what we would just ask is, remember Hyrum. As you read those sections, Hyrum's voice is angry. And we appreciate the opportunity to share these things with